Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. This afternoon, I'm again joined by Andy Nowicki. And we're going to talk about the alternative right and statism and sort of authoritarianism and some of maybe the problems that we might have with that. So, what are some of the problems or dangers that you see in the alt-right, within certain sectors of the alt-right, this kind of uncritical view of statism and authority?
Well, hi, Todd. Thanks for having me on again. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
if you're throwing the question to me right now, I mean, I don't know if I have anything profound to say about the dangers of uh, authoritarianism or gravitating towards authoritarianism, wanting or professing a belief in the pure principle, as it's called, the idea that we need a leader to screw constitutionalism, screw the law, screw whatever. We just need raw power. We need a strong arm man to come in and take control and do what needs to be done. I mean, I don't know. To me, it seems self-evident that there's a lot of problem. There are a lot of problems with that whole perspective, and I don't know. I have a hard time believing that it's really what people actually believe, because I mean, the alternative right movement seems to me to be grounded in anti-authoritarianism. Its most significant, the most significant force propelling it is a sort of thumb your nose, raise a middle finger to the authorities. And so this other side of it, where apparently some people actually sincerely want it's hard to know all this Trump and whatnot. A lot of that is ironic, obviously. Like much of the meme culture is ironic, but a significant, from what I can gather, there is a significant portion of the people who would call themselves alt-right who would say, yeah, what we need is a strong leader, a man to come in, again, disregard the law. There's this sort of sneering contempt for constitutionalism, which I understand, kind of conservative, the sort of toothless conservatives who always scream about the Constitution or wave the U.S. Constitution around. I'm not a worshiper of the document known as the U.S. Constitution, but it does seem to me that there is a place for law. I mean, if you believe in the state and the need for the existence of the state, then you need certain parameters for that state. I don't know, this whole idea that that just to sneer at the idea of the Constitution, sneer at the idea of established law, of the notion that we need to have certain laws specifically demarcated to say, well, what we really need is just a strong leader to come in and impose his authority on the rest of us, and that's what will make us a healthy, non-degenerate society again. I just really have a hard time with that. I mean, even speaking temperamentally, just on the level of, I think I'm a pretty anti-authoritarian kind of guy myself, which isn't to say, that authority is bad in and of itself, and it isn't. And of course, you shouldn't just be contrarian, as I've been accused of being sometimes, maybe sometimes with merit. You don't want to just thumb your nose at any authority just because it has authority. But I think that there are obviously a lot of flaws with the authorities today. The authorities today are by and large people who, I would say, simply want to kill us. They aren't going to really care that much if we die or if we suffer. Painting with a broad brush here, but I think that is the truth, largely speaking. And so I don't know why I'm supposed to suddenly turn it around and say, okay, well, if you are with us, then it's okay, to have unlimited authority and screw the law, screw the Constitution. We can make it mean whatever we want it to mean, etc., and so forth. I just think there's a real problem with that.
Yeah, yeah. I think one aspect, I mean, while pinning down what the alt-right is still a somewhat difficult subject. I think one common theme in the alt-right is a kind of pro-Western, pro-Occidental outlook, where they want to restore Western civilization as they envision it once was at a certain point in its past. And this authoritarian streak that we see in some elements of the alt-right, I think is odd, and then it's actually a kind of direct contradiction to the sort of political ethos of that European tradition. In classical times with the Greeks and the Romans, and then in the tribal societies of the Celts and the Germans, the idea of a god king like a pharaoh or the son of heaven in China or the Babylonians, you didn't have that. You had essentially popular assemblies where the men would come together and um, vote or negotiate settlements for the community. And then that would be considered the process of how laws were made and came to. And you have with Alexander the Great invading Persia, he adopts a lot of the trappings of Persian despotism, which is itself a derivative from ancient Egypt and Babylon. And the Romans, of course, as a republic, defeat the Hellenistic monarchies. But then, in so conquering the Greeks, they then, in their contact with the Persians, they then adopt a lot of those same practices. Right? Augustus says he's a god; you have to worship him as a god. And then,
Right.
Diocletian institutes a lot of these ideas. The idea of the panegyric, praising the great leader, worshiping the great leader. Proskynesis. And during the Middle Ages, um, in Christendom, in the East with Russia, and in the West with the Holy Roman Empire, that kind of legacy continued. Though in Western Europe, not quite as systematically, because as we would see the Italian city-states and, say, for instance, Switzerland as well, there's kind of a reemergence of more representative styles of government, which was the universal norm prior to Diocletian. I mean, prior to the Roman Empire,
Mhm.
all the European peoples had popular assemblies. The Vikings had the Icelandic Vikings had the Thing, the Anglo-Saxons had the Folkmoot, and the Rus had the Vetch, all until they were replaced by conquest. In the case of Russia, by the Mongols. In the case of the Celts and the Germans, by the Romans of the Holy Roman Empire. And we see with like the Renaissance Reformation a return to this kind of popular assembly, constitutional form of government. And in an effort to defend Western values, they've ended up, whether they know it or not, adopting essentially uh, values of the Orient, the despotic god kings of the East, which they give lip service to hating. They say, "Oh, we don't want to have Eastern influences. We're Western. We're Greek and
We don't
Roman
need
or
those
Teutonic."
muds.
Yeah, the muds. Yeah, but what they're doing is according to their own worldview, they're
Those
adopting
dogs.
mud government,
Yeah.
which is
Um,
kind of an unspoken contradiction.
yeah. No, I mean, I guess I mean, you obviously know a lot more history than I do, and that was an interesting little mini dissertation just now about the introduction of despotism to the West. I mean, I think maybe the case can be made that there is, there is the West is not one thing. It's not a static thing, and there's a continuum of different ideologies, and as you've just said, as you have just mentioned, regardless of where it came from, there have been times when the belief in despotism has taken hold in the West. But I would say it's only in the West, from what I can gather, from what I've heard about, from what I've read, and so forth. It's pretty much only in the West that you have this real history or tradition of resisting despotism and of questioning the seeing the limits of power, seeing how power ought to be limited. That absolute power corrupts absolutely. To use that often used phrase, and there really isn't much of a history of that in other civilizations. So that's part of what makes the West unique. So I guess it's complicated. because there's a history of embracing despotism over some eras, as you've mentioned, in the ancient world, and more recently, of course, with National Socialism and Fascism, which in turn I think derived from something, historically speaking, or they found their roots somewhere in what the West is what is considered the West. But I would say, and I think maybe I would assume you would agree, that this is the exception rather than the norm.
Yes, yes. Authoritarian regimes, and in the sense of we think of a totalitarian state or
Right.
the Pharaoh or the Son of Heaven, are not normative for European history.
Right. Thinking of the ruler as a god, which is normative even today in Japan. And Japan is, I dig Japan. I don't live there like Colin does, but sometimes I think I'd like to. It's a cool place, and I appreciate a lot of what it has to offer culturally speaking. But they do. There isn't much of a history of the notion of individual. Let's say the value of individual life in Japan or in other non-Western places, and there's the idea that if you are the emperor, you are everything, and if you are, a lowly peasant or serf, or what would it be in Japan? I don't know. What would the equivalent of a serf be?
A peasant, maybe? I don't know.
But then you're nothing, and you live and die. The emperor can make you do whatever he wants, and you have no right to complain because he's the emperor and you're not. I mean, that's not the sort of I think you can be against that sort of mentality without going the other way and saying, like people do today, going in the direction that democracy and saying that everybody's equal, everybody's the same, egalitarianism. I mean, obviously that's not the answer either, and that's not what I'm advocating. But there is a real problem with, I think, I mean, I think what I see a lot in the alt-right culture, it's reactionary culture. In that, and I think it's good, and I don't use the term reactionary in a denigrating way, like a leftist would, because there's a lot to react against in the broader culture. But the downside of it is you do have this tendency to see just I call it campaigns of sneering, and you see these kind of manifesting themselves sites, and it seems like it catches on like wildfire. It's a very it's something where you see and you want to do it too, and so you have all these people now making dank memes about how gay and faggoty libertarians are, or whatever. And I'm not defending libertarianism per se, but I do think it's not just something to dismiss out of hand, and I don't think that constitutionalism is something just to dismiss or to sneer at, and so it's disheartening, I guess, but it's part of the way things go,
Yeah,
part
yeah.
of human
I
nature.
think the important thing to take away is, as you pointed out earlier, in the West, it's really the only part of the world where there's been a consistent tradition that pushes back against authoritarianism, where the ruler is a god. I mean, yes, you had Rome where the ruler was seen as a god, but again, you have the tradition of saying, no, the ruler is not God. Right, in England.
And people didn't like it. I mean, Caesar got assassinated because people didn't like the idea of becoming a god.
Exactly. Well, I mean, in England during the Reformation, right, you had Lex Rex, the law is king, written by I forget his name now, but it was a Puritan, And he said that the law is king, so law is important within the individual, than the king himself. Because right in the kind of authoritarian systems, that the king is the law, his will is the law, and they're saying no. The law is distinct from the king, and that's one of the great political discoveries, if you will, of the Renaissance Reformation era, is that the king and the ruler is not a law unto himself, but there's an external law to which he is subordinate to. And he then has to abide by those rules, which by definition is going to constrain his absolute power. The dangers of arbitrary power, I don't think are fully appreciated, in part because in the West, we haven't had to deal with arbitrary power in a very long time. Mindless arbitrary power, which might be exercised by a pharaoh or a Chinese emperor or a totalitarian dictator, is something that we don't really experience. So we don't have any experience with it to compare it against. So if somebody, it wasn't uncommon if the emperor stole your daughter or your wife for his harem, or if he stole your property, like Ahab stole from Naboth in, I think, the Second Kings. We're not used to that. We're not used to having our property or our women or whatever we have just stolen from us because the king wants what we have. If we had to live with that, the alt-right might be less favorable to our arbitrary authority.
Yeah, we haven't experienced it in a really egregious way, like the way you're talking about. I mean, but I would say that my suspicion is that the ruling class more or less rules with impunity, and when they constrain themselves, it's not out of respect for the rule of law, but just out of, I don't know. I tend to be cynical about these kinds of things, and I do see things like, I mean, this isn't a cool thing to talk about in the alt-right, but I'm very staunchly anti-abortion, and beyond just the question of whether abortion is right or wrong, I think that it can't really be said that passage of a law like Roe versus Wade wasn't just an arbitrary assertion of raw power on the part of the judiciary. And there are plenty of other cases like that as well, where we see in America taking the form of the Supreme Court, where they suddenly just say, well, or with gay marriage. I mean, that's a less baleful thing than killing babies, but it's still, I would say not in accord with natural law. And I would say that the way that it was imposed, that was made into law here, certainly was not done in a way that, according to the rule of law, it's supposed to happen. And so we do have things like that, impositions like that, usurpations of both natural law and constitutional law, which I think accounts for my, again, although I'm not a doctrinaire libertarian, I do have a libertarian maybe streak in me, and my understanding of the way things work is that, there's a lot more chicanery and a lot more hypocrisy among the ruling class, and I generally conceive of the people who rule us as and I see them more and more as hateful people who who do not mean us well. And so again, the rule of law, I think, works in our favor, at least in some way or other, and constitutionalism works in our favor in some way in creating a culture where these people can't just totally run amok. They do what they want. They feel like they have the right to do whatever they want, and they can impose things when they couch it the right way, or manipulate things the right way. But still, generally speaking, constitutionalism and the rule of law is our way of pushing back against these kinds of usurpations to the extent that we are able to, we who don't actually hold the reins of power. So I would say that, we don't have the really egregious kind of violations of natural law that we would find in certain other cultures, like the ones where you talked about, where the king just says, "I want your daughter. I'm taking her now. You don't have any legitimate complaint because I'm the king. You're not."
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Oh, go
but
ahead.
it's more complicated. It's still. I think there's still things like that are still happening, and but it's more complicated. It's more couched in a certain. It's couched in the phraseology of law or of lawfulness, but I would say there still is a good deal of
Yeah, yeah.
hypocrisy.
A couple of points you brought up that I think are interesting. You brought up natural law as one, and then also how constitutions can protect us from arbitrary rule of the a more egregious kind that we talked about. I think a really good example of the latter is if you look at, say, Russia, and you look at, say, the England. In Russia, where you had a strong tradition of arbitrary power in the Tsar, when the Bolshevik Revolution took over, it was very easy for them to then convert that machinery of government into a genocidal organism, to just kill off everybody they wanted. In England, where there were socialists, there were communists and Marxists, they had a very hard time taking over the system of government. You don't really have a complete quote unquote socialist takeover where they run the means of production until after World War II, when they nationalized heavy industry. And then, of course, in the 70s and 80s under Thatcher, they then privatized most of it again. So these constitutional checks in the United States and England have been impediments to these Marxists who've tried to take over our society. Whereas in Russia, those impediments weren't there. And so it was actually a lot easier for them to take over and then implement their horrific worldview on the rest of us. And
what is your assessment of Russia today? Because that's a hot button issue in the
yeah,
alt-right.
I know. I would say I feel kind of like Solzhenitsyn. Like Solzhenitsyn, right, was a Russian nationalist. He loved Russia, but it was ruled by a bunch of atheist dictators, so he rooted for the West because he's like, well, I don't really like America per se, but it's a lot better than the people running my country. I kind of feel like Solzhenitsyn in that respect because while generally I think Russia is a kind of autocratic and somewhat dangerous force, given that it's now accepting Christianity, while in the West, we're being in Europe, you're being arrested for denouncing gay marriage, and you're getting fined and persecuted for not baking cakes for gay couples. It's like, I mean, Putin is having legislation in place that prevents homosexuals from adopting children. Whereas, I'm like, in America, you never have that. So it's like the roles are reversed. It's like the world of the Western values that we used to defend during the Cold War have gone over to Russia, and the communist values that we were fighting have come over to the United States. And it's kind of like we've flipped roles here. So while in practice I would want to contain Russia, in theory, though, and right now, it's like, well, they're doing better than we are, so I can't be too down on them at the moment,
And even I would say in some ways it's worse in the West now. In some ways, I mean, the West is not it's not living under the kind of oppression that the people in the communist ruled world lived under. So I'm not making a comparison there, but it is worse in the sense that even in communist era, Russia, Soviet Union, and Eastern Europe, even under real Marxism, there was no cultural Marxism. There wasn't a denigration of the family and a mockery of the patriarchy and an imposition of perversity on everybody, like there is in the West today under what's been called cultural Marxism. So Russia's now in the position of resisting cultural Marxism because of their strong, tradition. I guess maybe I shouldn't talk too much about why it is, because maybe we should defer to others who know more about it. But it seems like there still is a tradition of traditionalism, of moral traditionalism, social conservatism that actually survived the communist years, and still isn't in place in Russia today, even with I'm sure there's a lot of corruption, a lot of hypocrisy, and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. I think this distinction, as we see, the culture of Marxism in the West, and the lack of it in Russia, is kind of the result of the two different schools of Marxism, right? There was the more totalitarian, revolutionary Marxism of Lenin and Mao, and then there was the more democratic and subversive Marxism of people like Edward Bernstein of Germany, or the English Fabian School with people like Eugene and Beatrice Webbs. When you have a violent, in-your-face totalitarian Marxism, you kind of know who the enemy is and that this guy is really bad. And so whatever they're against, you tend to be in favor of because, well, if they don't like it, it must be good. Whereas the more subversive Marxism in the West has been more successful because it's convinced people that they actually want this. It's like people actually are lobbying government for these things, but they don't know what they're asking for. And so I think the slow kill is more effective in the long run because it gets people to actually want it.
It's more insidious. It's more taking over the mind instead of just the body.
It's the difference between having your arm chopped off and then having having cancer slowly eat away inside your body. For having your arm chopped off, you're going to have shock and you're like, whoa, that's bad. You don't want to do that again. But with like a cancer creeping through the body, you don't notice it right away until the final stages when you start getting really sick.
Right.
And I think it's kind of that,
Yeah. So, getting back to the alt-right, what is your why do you think this is? I mean, you were asking me a few minutes ago why. Well, I thought of everything was, the reason, or my critique of this strain. But what do you think is what do you think accounts for it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways you can account for it. I think in a lot of ways, now this is going to be probably very controversial, that the alt-right is really a kind of left-wing movement and isn't really a part of the right as a whole, because the kind of racialism and eugenic policies that they advocate was quite common for progressive liberals in the 1920s. And in fact, people like Lothrop Stoddard and Madison Grant, who were progressive liberals. Margaret Sanger, exactly. And in fact, a lot of alt-right websites and popular and famous individuals in the movement praise those 1920s progressives for their erudition and insight. And I feel like that the left by nature is authoritarian because, at least beginning with the French Revolution, they have a certain vision of who man is, right? Man is Man the Machine by Lemaitre. We're just matter in motion with no soul. And the elite that manage society can then control the environment to then mold us in their own image. Tabula rasa by John Locke. So for a tabula rasa and a soulless machine, which is the left-wing conception of man, then the planners can then create environmental conditions that can then, in their mind, shape man into their own image. And that of course demands a totalitarian state, because to have that kind of control over the environment would be impossible in any sort of limited government. And while they're not egalitarians, there's like two strains though, right? There's the egalitarian left, and then the more elitist left, like Stoddard and Sanger. And I think the alt-right is in part derivative from the elitist left. I mean, Margaret Sanger said in the American Birth Control League that her goal was to, through eugenics, breed the Nietzschean Superman. That's what she said.
And Margaret Sanger was a flat-out racist, but was a progressive. And so today, anti-racism has become part of the left, or has been marshaled by the mainstream left. And so if you're anti-racist in the sense of, for any reason, then you're seen as not being of the left. There's probably a complicated set of conditions that have led to this circumstance. But so for that reason, there's a strange conglomeration of different kinds of people with different kinds of mentalities thrown together in the alt-right.
Yeah. That's one source. I think another source is now there's the group, and I don't just mean the 1488ers, which are a more specific group, but even there's a general nostalgia in the alt-right for the authoritarian regimes of fascism, Nazism, and even to some extent the Roman Empire. Right, you'll often hear about the European imperium, or some such position,
Mm-hmm.
and which is kind of inspired by Rome. And this kind of, it's kind of a atavistic respect for domination. Like, so when a Viking slays his opponent in combat and then gloats over his victory, like when Achilles ties the dead Hector to his chariot and rides around the walls of Troy humiliating Hector and his family. It's almost like this atavistic desire to control and punish people. And they see in the regimes of the Roman Empire, the fascism in Italy, National Socialism in Germany, a means to exercise that desire. It's like, yes, I can finally do this now. I'm empowered now to crack some heads because I'm in this new system that is a totalitarian system.
Mm-hmm. So in that way, it's something just really primal that leads some people to embrace this ideology.
Yeah, I think that's another angle
The
that
desire to just to dominate and to brutalize.
Yeah. What Augustine would call libido dominandi, the lust to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
And the totalitarian system obviously is attractive to people of that nature for whatever reason, independent of the ends that the system is fighting for.
If they can be the
Whether
ones
it's
who dish it out, not the ones who have to endure it.
exactly. So whether it's communism and we're all equal, or it's National Socialism and you have to breathe the Superman, it doesn't really matter what the end goal is, as long as I'm the one in the suit and the uniform with the big stick beating up on everybody else. I think there's an element of that as well. And like I said, I think there's this. You see a lot of esoteric philosophy in the alt-right, which has Hindu strands, and I wonder how much of this is. Well, William Graham Sumner, an American libertarian-ish type person during the Spanish-American War, wrote a book called "The Spanish Conquest of America." And what he meant by that was that the imperial Spanish Empire that was tyrannical and oppressive, that we Americans theoretically despised, had adopted in practice the very same system of empire and oppression. And I think probably through the fetishizing of Eastern esotericism, specifically India, which is a very authoritarian caste-based system, they've imbibed through us kind of osmosis this kind of like Oriental mindset of top-down authoritarian control based on classes and castes in order to achieve their worldview. Because I mean, the Hindu metaphysics is like, look, if you commit bad karma in a previous life, you're going to be reincarnated as a slave or a dog or an untouchable, right. And so you're
if you're a Dali, you deserve it because of what you did.
Yeah, you deserve it. You deserve it. So that kind of philosophy of Hinduism kind of entails an authoritarianism where, and you have no, what appeal can you make? I'm an untouchable. It's my fault that I'm an untouchable, and so I can't really complain to anybody about it because I'm being punished for a previous life. And so if you read a lot of that philosophy, I think it's possible for that mindset to rub off on you if you're not paying attention to that political, the politics that arise out of Hinduism.
Did you read the article that was published at Radix called "The Pro-Life Temptation"?
Yeah, I did. That caused a huge controversy in the alt-right.
Yeah, well, I mean, I rarely write a response to articles, even ones that I don't care for. But that one, really got under my skin, triggered me, as we say.
Oh, you got triggered.
Yeah, but I mean, it does summarize a certain. Well, I think maybe it was the one thing about it that was most presumptuous. I found really presumptuous was, well, we on the alt-right, we don't care about black genocide. And he talked about this. He referenced this. Well, I think it's blackgenocide.com. I think you can look it up. I think it's under that name. and it's a site kept by that's the composer of the material there is has taken note of how the abortion industry takes, even today when it's past the point where you can say, we want to wipe out inferior races like people like Margaret Sanger and her cronies used to. They still set up shop in black neighborhoods in the hood and the ghetto, if you will, and market their wares. They're killing wares to black people, and the rate of black abortion is extremely high, to the point where you even have people on the alt-right, racists on the alt-right, saying, "Thank God for abortion, because if without it, we'd really be swamped with these muds."
Yeah, I've thought that if the Ku Klux Klan really wants to get rid of black people, they should just work for Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, and so I'm very much against abortion, no matter who is getting aborted, and maybe I'm the exception to the rule there, but there was something just very very presumptuous about the notion that, well, of course we don't really have a problem with this. I mean,
well, it's interesting
for me too.
I think this view of abortion has a lot to do more with the millennial generation. For instance, an older school 1488er like Harold Covington, he's famous for the Northwest series of white nationalist novels. He,
Right.
I haven't read extensively on abortion about him, but he's basically like, yeah, abortion is killing people, and that's generally wrong. I'm sure he might make some caveats here and there, but Covington, I think was born in the 60s or something, 40s, 50s or 60s, and he's like, yeah, this is killing people, and generally this is wrong. It's like this younger generation. I don't even think that George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party, would have even been so cavalier about abortion. I think it's maybe more of a millennial thing.
It's a moral deadening is what I would compare it to. I mean, it's a loss of moral sense. Maybe having been progressively desensitized ever since abortion was first made legal or was approved of. Although I've seen statistics which suggest that more people are pro-life today than used to be, like 20 years ago. So I'm not sure what I would say. I don't know whether that's specifically the millennials or not. I don't know where if you asked a sampling of millennials if they were pro-life or pro-choice, I'm not sure what the general answer would be there. But I've heard that the tide has, far from there being more like they thought would happen, that they thought there would be more approval of abortion, but that actually hasn't happened, and that I'm not saying that everybody's pro-life or everybody's intensely pro-life, or that that's the main issue for even most people, but I've heard, I think that when you scratch beneath the surface, there still is an awareness, and you tell people what exactly abortion is. And I'm not harping on abortion here because I'm a Catholic, which is what I think a lot of people listening might think. I mean, to me, it just gets at the heart of, what's right and what's wrong. And if you can't agree that killing children is wrong, then there's not really much we can agree on. I would say, but it is interesting that as somebody pointed out in the presidential debate that's going on right now, abortion is not an issue at all. It's not being discussed at all. So I'm not sure what that really means. I mean, people are glomming onto Trump on the right because they like his stance on immigration, on halting immigration, or what they think his stance is. I'm not sure what he really is going to do. It's true that social issues like abortion seem to have gone by the wayside. So there's a lot of different indications. I'm not sure what to where the truth really lies. But
Yeah, it's a little. I was looking up on Gallup just while you were talking, the Gallup poll. This is from 2010, and only 23% of 18 to 29-year-olds said that abortion should be illegal in all cases.
mhm,
So the rest of the percentages would be legal under any was
right,
24%, and legal under certain was 51%.
mhm.
So the idea that it should be totally legal in all cases was only 23% of the people polled from the age 18 to 29.
How many say it should be
And
legal in every case? Like it should just be.
24% said it should be legal in every case, and
Uh,
51% should be legal under certain cases. But I mean,
uh,
what? I guess maybe life of the mother. I'm not sure. It didn't specify what they mean by certain
right,
cases. So
right.
there's a lot of in between that you could fill that in with that I'm not sure what the poll actually said. But yeah, it's maybe that's more than 20 years ago. I mean, I don't know what 20 years ago how many millennials said that abortion should be legal in all cases, but or
I
there
mean,
were millennials then, I guess.
the
But
millennials weren't around back then, or they were little kids
yeah,
back then.
exactly. They weren't around yet,
They
but
were little kids who had escaped being aborted back then.
that's right. That's right. I think another reason why the alt right tends towards authoritarianism, at least amongst the racial alt right. I mean, there's certainly the manosphere alt right that's far more individualistic. You can think of like Rush V and Davis Arini. They're far more individualistic than the more pro racial oriented alt right. Because I mean, the alt
Right.
right can kind of be broken down as being red pilled on gender differences. The manosphere. Men and women are different. And then being red pilled on race. Whites and blacks are different. And that's kind of the big dividing line amongst the alt right. I think is what do they emphasize more, race or gender? The gender oriented alt right is less authoritarian and more libertarian in its
Mhm.
views, and the racially oriented alt right is more uh, more tends more to the authoritarian position. I
Right.
think no part of that I think uh, is also the fact that amongst the alt right, I don't have any like statistics at the end of my fingers, but I think if you were to poll most people on the alt right, they would probably be either atheist or pagan. Probably more atheist than pagan. And the history of atheism in the 20th century has certainly been one tending towards authoritarianism. Whether
Mhm.
it's in Mussolini was an atheist, he was a fascist. Stalin and Lenin were atheists, and there's really
Mhm.
a 20th century tendency of atheists in general to be more authoritarian because they see religion as the boogeyman. Like instead of the
Yeah.
bourgeoisie or instead of like male privilege or white privilege, it's religion. And
Mhm.
like their Marxist counterparts and their feminist counterparts, they have to wipe out this threat to civilization, and that
Mhm.
usually entails a great amount of political force in the hands of one or a few individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. That might be true, and it's again like it was. I guess getting back to what we were talking about earlier, maybe we're close to coming full circle right now with this conversation, although it's interesting. But it's just been this tendency that I've seen really over the past couple of years at certain alt-right sites, uh, and certain ones seem to lead this charge. Just seem to be the most prone to sneering, uh, and again, that's the most obnoxious thing about it to me is it's just sort of like libertarians, losers, cucks. Instead of why I think libertarianism misses the boat. X, Y, Z. Um, but just this, and it's also like I've mentioned before. There's this it's the current year syndrome, which I think, and I wrote about this in my latest article. Alt writers mock the whole "it's the current year" notion that there's certain things we have to believe because it's 2016. But a lot of them seem to embody this mindset. And when they say things like, "Well, it's 2016 now. It's not 2012 anymore. The Ron Paul campaign is over. So now it's libertarians. Get with the program, cuck. It's not
Yeah,
Ron Paul.
yeah, yeah,
Quit following Ron
yeah,
Paul.
yeah.
Ron Paul is history. And Um, that's just ridiculous. It's stupid.
Well, this is interesting too. This kind of sneering culture, which of course I think is also partly derivative from both the left and the atheist community, right? The atheist community sneers at
Yeah,
religious people, and the left tends to sneer at conservatives and traditionalists. And I think a lot of these people
yeah,
came from those communities at one point in their life, and so that kind of sneering attitude. But this is one of my more substantive critiques of the alt-right, at least certain elements of it, is that there's two ways you can have a society with a worldview imputed to it, right? You can have a kind of conditioned Pavlovian system, where humans are conditioned. Have you ever heard of John Taylor Gatto? He's a
no,
historian of education and how it was. Yeah, he basically argues, I think very convincingly, that public education was a method of psychological control by the elite establishment of Europe and America to sort of condition people not to think. In fact, the Rockefellers blatantly state that, and I think it was like 1911, one of their meetings of one of their institutions. They say that we don't want people to think.
right,
Fichte, the father of modern education, Fichte from Germany, said, "Yeah, we don't want people to think either because they might think the wrong thing." And so you can, kind of condition people to be behavioral and respond to stimuli rather than think, or you can train them how to think.
right.
So it's like the difference between catching a fish for a guy or teaching him how to fish to feed him for a lifetime. If the alt-right, I think, doesn't disagree with the left on the means of disseminating ideas, the idea that you condition people through psychological stimuli, they like that. They just don't like the ideas that people are being conditioned to accept. Whereas I think a more robust position would be, look, this whole system based on conditioning people to be, Pavlovian dogs salivating whenever you ring a bell, is that itself is the problem. Because if you read, say, literature, just not even literature, just like letters or correspondence from people in the 1930s and 40s, when the education system was much better and was, even then it had faults, but, or even go back to the American Civil War and read letters that people write to home, from the front. High school educated people, these people are very thoughtful, intelligent, critical
Oh yeah,
thinkers. 150 years later, 100 years later, it's, totally the opposite. People can barely put
dumbing down.
two words together.
Yeah,
And I think the alt-right, whether conscious or not, hasn't realized that is the problem. The problem is, yes, the leftist ideology is bad, but the problem is not so much that as the destruction of people's critical thinking skills due to our defective education system. Once you teach people how to think, 100 years ago, nobody would have bought social justice warrior nonsense because 100 years ago, people could think for themselves and say, hey, wait, that's just total baloney. It doesn't make any sense at all. But now that we forgot how to think critically, how to use our reason and logic and evidence, the social justice warriors have a lot easier time because they prey on emotions. How do you feel? How does this make you feel? Rather than, is it true? Is it rational? Can you construct a syllogism that proves these points? And I think the alt-right doesn't want to teach people how to think. It wants to condition people, but it wants to run the ministry of propaganda, right? Rather than abolish the ministry of propaganda, let's say a libertarian might want to do. Yes, the ministry of propaganda is the problem. Whereas, the alt-right would say, no, that's okay. The problem is the wrong people are running it. And I'm like, well,
yeah,
actually, you're both right. The people running it are the problem, but also the ministry of propaganda is the problem too.
yeah. No, I mean, like I said in an interview with that I gave to the Relief, this Canadian YouTube channel. They were asking me about the alt-right. This was a few days after Hillary's speech, where she mentioned the alt-right. The alt-right's not a monolith, and I try not to think. I hope what you're saying isn't true of much of the people who would call themselves the alt-right. But I think there is a strain a strain within the alt-right that is very much along the lines of what you're talking about. Just like there's a strain within the alt-right that could be correlated with what was historically the left, the progressive left, in the early part of the century with the Madison Grant and Planned Parenthood idea that eugenics, developing a race of thoroughbreds, as like Margaret Sanger says, and tearing up the human weeds that are the inferior people. I think there's a strain of that, but it's not the entirety of. I mean, you don't have to be anti-racist in that way to be to have a real legitimate beef with how the grievances, extent of anti-white rhetoric in the mainstream culture today. I mean, so again, it's complicated. I would say it's not a monolith, but there is a strain of that, enough of it that is, well, makes me I don't want to say uncomfortable, but it
concerned.
Makes me aware of
no. Yeah, it's problematic.
It's problematic. Yes, it's very problematic.
But I was going to ask you. I was checking out your blog just recently, and I see you had a link to the Fascism podcast I just did. So since it's kind of related to this topic of authoritarianism and the alt-right, what did you think of the Fascism podcast I did with Keith Preston?
I haven't listened to it yet. That was posted by Colin, who's the main editor of Alt-Right, of Alternative Right.
Oh no!
So I haven't heard it yet. I actually know it was posted. I'm sorry, it was posted by Keith Preston, who's now an assistant or associate editor or something.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So I haven't heard it yet, but I look forward to listening to it. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting insights there.
Yeah, because since it was related to our topic, I'd hope you'd listen to it, so maybe we could pick your brain on that a little bit, because it's directly related to this current conversation. But I think
we can talk about it.
I think you're right, though, but the alt-right being amorphous. There's a lot of elements to it that some of what is said is true of those elements, but not necessarily of others. And there isn't really been any attempt to. Well, the problem is any attempt from within the alt-right to give it a clear definition, kind of like a party platform like the National Socialist Party, would be very involved, would lead to a lot of infighting, and would take quite some time to finally polish up. And they're not really even close to that right now.
Yeah, no. I think it's good to be amorphous considering the conditions that we live under. And just, again, I think I've made this point before, but considering the extremely powerful juggernaut that is our enemy, the totalitarian left, the PC left, I'm welcoming of everybody. I think we should have a broad coalition right now. And including people who would call themselves liberals or leftists, but who are unhappy with the current state of things, unhappy with political correctness or cultural Marxism. I think really the more the merrier. There's talk about the alt-left these days. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yeah, I did. I didn't watch it, but I saw I saw listed in Millennial Woes, he had the alt-left hangout. I didn't watch it, but I saw that he had that.
And I think it's good.
I was going to say, what do you think about Ramsey? I remember a few months ago, Ramsey Paul was saying that the sort of the 1488ers are. This is like maybe during the earlier period of the Trump campaign. Well, I think it was still during the Republican primaries, and he was saying, like, the 1488ers are sort of like being driven to the side because they're too antisocial. They're just too crude and even just dangerous. So do you think that Ramsey Paul is correct in his assessment that the sort of like the neo-Nazi fash crowd is kind of being pushed to the sides, or is that just like maybe wishful thinking?
I don't know. I mean, as far as pushing them to the side, who would be doing the pushing, and who's?
Well, maybe pushing's the wrong word. They have less in. Maybe I should have said, according to Ramsey Paul, they were exerting less influence on the movement. They were just more. They were just more. They were just irrelevant now. Is maybe more what he
Mhm.
was saying. It's like, the new crop of alt-right converts is just not. They're just not listening to these guys anymore. They're just irrelevant to this new alt-right normal.
That might be true. I mean, there's like the kind of '90s skinheads, the William Pierce kind of followers. Uh, that might not be as much of a thing today. That might be a little bit passe, if you will. If that's the point that he was making, then I think from what I gather about Ramsey Paul, that he would more advocate that they be pushed out, or he seems to really evince a great dislike of the 1488ers.
Wasn't there a public row between him and the 1488ers? Pretty public row between them.
I think so.
A few months ago, there was a lot of back and forth YouTube videos and crazy stuff that goes down like that. But
yeah,
I think we're kind of nearing the end of our discussion. So if you have any last words before you wrap it up.
No, I guess I think maybe the central point of the podcast, how we deal with authority, whether we should just be welcoming of some quote unquote God Emperor. It's going to be interesting to see whether that takes shape or not if Trump wins in November, and if he then, which he almost inevitably will, goes on to being a much more toast kind of middle of the road kind of candidate or kind of president, that I almost certainly think he will be. What will be the response to that from alt-righters? That will be a very interesting thing to observe if things go down that route, because I mean, Trump wasn't talking about immigration. He wasn't talking about illegal immigration before August of 2015. I mean, there's something very at least not that I know of. I mean, and certainly not in the way that we've heard him talking about it, where he just made this issue his own, and really, got people behind him for the kind of, what the rhetoric that he was spouting forth. We didn't hear that from him, and he's a public figure. He's been around since the '80s. I mean, I remember him, and he was not he's never been, Mr. Anti mass immigration until just recently. So anyway, if he wins and if he becomes not the God Emperor that some people are expecting him to be, what will be the result? That'll be interesting to observe again if it happens.
Oh yeah, it will. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Andy. It's been a pleasure as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this is Todd Lewis, host of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.